There is a world that sits on the other side of catastrophe. A world where the laws of physics packed their bags sometime around the end of human civilization and just quietly left. Where the rules that once governed how matter behaved, how light traveled, how bodies aged and died, those rules became more like suggestions. Gentle guidelines that reality chose to honor when it felt like it, and set aside the rest of the time in favor of something stranger, older, and far more alive. That world is the land of U. And the thing that makes it what it is, the invisible architecture underneath every impossible creature, every sentient candy person, every ice wizard stumbling through a snowstorm with no memory of who he used to be is magic. But magic in U is not the simple trick and sparkle kind. It is not a tool that characters pick up and put down when the plot requires it. The magic of U has a history. It has a geology. It has scars. It runs through the land like an underground river that shaped every valley and canyon before anyone alive could remember it being there, and it keeps shaping things now whether anyone notices or not. This is the story of that magic. All of it. From the very first moment something impossible happened in this world, all the way through the mushroom clouds and the amber prisons and the candy kingdoms and the cosmic comets, right up to the moment a woman named Betty put on a cursed crown for the man she loved and became something the universe had never seen before. Get comfortable. Pull your blanket up. Let the light go low. Because the history of magic in U begins not with a spell or a sorcerer, it begins with a comet. Part 1. The world before magic, ancient Earth, and the first elementals. The Earth that became U was not always a magical place. Before the mushroom clouds, before the candy kingdoms, before the vampire queens and ice wizards and mathematical princesses, the world was much the same as we know it. Recognizable, grounded, running on the same physics and chemistry and biology that governs our own reality. People drove cars, they used smartphones. They argued on the internet and drank coffee and worried about ordinary things. The planet obeyed its own natural laws, with the stubborn consistency of something that had been doing so for 4.5 billion years and had no intention of stopping. But here's the thing Adventure Time slowly, carefully reveals across its seasons of layered storytelling. Magic was not absent from this world. It had simply retreated, gone dormant, pulled back like a tide that would eventually return, waiting out the long age of technology and reason the way a seed waits out a drought patient, coiled, ready. And long before human civilization reached its peak and began its terrible unraveling, the magic that would one day drown the land of U in impossible color had already left its fingerprints on the deep history of the planet. Go back far enough. Back to when the continents were different shapes. Back to the Cretaceous, when the sky was populated by creatures that looked like they belonged in a nightmare, and the dominant life forms on Earth had scales instead of skin, and massive bodies that shook the ground when they moved. Even then, the elements were alive. Adventure Time gives us a window into this ancient era through one of its most quietly devastating episodes, a story called Evergreen. It is set millions of years before Finn and Jake were born, before the Mushroom War, before human civilization existed in anything like its modern form. And it shows us something extraordinary. The 4 elemental forces that would one day define the kingdoms of O already had embodied representatives walking the ancient Earth. The 4 elements in Adventure Time's cosmology are not earth, air, fire, and water, as they are in classical Western philosophy. They are fire, ice, candy, and slime. Each one has, at all times throughout history, a living embodiment, a physical being whose nature and power are inextricably bound to that element. These beings die and are reborn in new forms across the eons, but the element never goes unrepresented. There is always a fire elemental, always an ice elemental, always a candy elemental, always a slime elemental walking the world somewhere. The soul of each element cycles through incarnations, the way water cycles through rain and river and ocean, always the same substance in endlessly different shapes. In the age of Evergreen, the ice elemental was a creature named Urgence Evergreen himself, and he was nothing like the endearing, fumbling Ice King who would one day haunt the mountains of U with kidnapping plans and badly written fanfiction. Evergreen was ancient, cold, severe in the way that very old and very powerful things sometimes become worn down to their essential nature by the accumulation of centuries. He presided over ice not as a gift but as a dominion, and the world he inhabited recognized him as something close to a god. The candy elemental of that era was a small, round, sweet-natured creature, gentle in the way that all the candy incarnations seem to be gentle, carrying a warmth that balanced the ice. The slime elemental was vast and slow and ancient in a different way than Evergreen, liquid and accommodating where Evergreen was rigid and unyielding. And the fire elemental burned with the particular intensity that fire always brings to any body it inhabits, all heat and urgency and transformation. These four elemental embodiments were not simply powerful magic users. They were the personifications of fundamental forces, the way you might imagine the ocean personified not just as something that made waves, but as something that was made of waves, that had no separate existence from the element itself. And the world they walked was a world where magic, though present, was thin, stretched, more potential than presence. The elementals had power, but that power was constrained by how little magic actually saturated the atmosphere of this ancient earth. The age of technology that would one day come had not yet arrived, but neither had the catastrophic event that would eventually send magic flooding back into the world in overwhelming quantities. The elementals existed in a kind of middle state, powerful enough to matter but not yet operating at the scale they would one day reach. What threatens this ancient world, and what sets in motion a chain of events that will ultimately shape the ice crown that Simon Petrikov finds in Scandinavia thousands of years later, is a comet. Not just any comet, a catalyst comet. The concept of catalyst comets is central to understanding magic in Adventure Time, and we will spend considerable time with them in a later section of this story. But the relevant thing to understand here, in the age of Evergreen, is that catalyst comets are not random astronomical events. They are intentional, cyclic, meaningful in a way that ordinary space rocks are not. Every 1,000 years, a catalyst comet strikes the Earth, and each one brings with it what the show describes as an agent of change, a concentrated burst of cosmic intention manifesting as physical impact, reshaping the world, shifting what is possible, redirecting the trajectory of all life on the planet. The green comet approaching the ancient Earth in Evergreen's era is not simply a mass extinction threat. It is something older and more purposeful. Its green color and its crowned, horned silhouette tell you everything you need to know about what it carries. This comet is the first incarnation of what will eventually become the Lich, a cosmic entity that embodies pure destruction. The universe's desire for extinction given physical form, bearing down on a world that cannot survive the impact without change. Urgence, Evergreen sees it coming. And he does what powerful, arrogant beings do when they see something they cannot simply overpower. He builds a weapon. The crown he creates is the most important magical artifact in the entire history of Wu. Not because of what it does when it works correctly, Evergreen never gets to see that, but because of what it does when it fails. What it becomes when it is worn by someone whose deepest wish is not the destruction of comets, but something smaller, more personal, more human. Evergreen designs the crown to grant the deepest wish of whoever wears it. In his mind, this is no complication at all, because the deepest wish of Urgence Evergreen is the destruction of the comet. What could be simpler? He is the most powerful being of his age, disciplined and ancient, and committed to a single purpose. He puts the crown on, it reads his wish, the comet is destroyed. That is how he has planned it. What he has not planned is the flaw that his fellow elementals see immediately, and that he dismisses with the contemptuous certainty of someone who has been the most powerful being in the room for so long that he no longer genuinely listens to other perspectives. The flaw is this: the crown does not simply grant the wearer's stated wish. It grants the wearer's deepest wish, the truest wish, the one they might not even be consciously aware of, hidden beneath whatever they think they want. The other elementals warn him. He ignores them and then freezes them, because that is what Urgence Evergreen does when wisdom inconveniences him. And then something goes wrong with his preparations, and he cannot wear the crown himself. His apprentice, a small dinosaur-like creature named Gunther who idolizes Evergreen with the totality that only the very young can manage, ends up wearing it instead. Gunther's deepest wish is not the destruction of the comet. Gunther's deepest wish is to be like his master. The crown reads this wish and begins granting it in the only way it knows how. It transforms Gunther into what Gunther most truly sees when he looks at Urgence Evergreen, a powerful, cold, somewhat mad ice wizard with enormous hair and a cape, and a certainty that he is the most important being in the room. The comet strikes. The dinosaurs die. The ancient elemental order of the world is shattered and rebuilt by the impact. And the crown carries on. Encoded with a fundamental magical directive it will never stop fulfilling. It turns whoever wears it into their deepest vision of what they wish to be, at the cost of everything they currently are. Thousands of years later, a man named Simon Petrikov finds this crown in Scandinavia. He puts it on to protect the woman he loves during a terrifying blackout. And the crown begins doing exactly what it was always going to do. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. The world of the ancient elementals is not yet done with us, because there is one more thing to understand about magic in the deep prehistoric era of Oo's history. The four elements were in balance. Not perfect balance, the elementals often disagreed, often had their own agendas, often failed to cooperate in the ways that the world needed them to. But they existed together, and their existence together created a kind of structural stability to the world's magical underpinning. Each element checked and balanced the others. Fire and ice pulled against each other. Candy and slime occupied different registers of the spectrum. Sweet and ancient, life-giving and transformative. Together they made a complete picture. That balance would be shattered by the Mushroom War. And what replaced it? The chaotic, oversaturated, almost delirious magic of the modern land of Oo is both more beautiful and more dangerous than anything Urgent's Evergreen's cold, ordered world ever produced. Hey, before we go any further into this story, drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love knowing who's out there settling in for this kind of deep lore dive. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this coming, and I don't want you to miss it. Part 2. The Great Mushroom War and the Return of Magic. The world ended, and then it became something else. This is the quiet, devastating premise underneath all of Adventure Time's color and warmth. The thing that makes the show's sweetness feel earned rather than shallow, because it has been grown in the soil of genuine catastrophe. Every piece of candy architecture, every sentient slime puddle, every rainbow of impossible creatures inhabiting the hills and valleys of Oo exists because human civilization made choices that caused everything to collapse, and then the universe rebuilt from the rubble in ways that no one who lived through the collapse could have predicted. The Great Mushroom War is the hinge point of all history in Adventure Time's universe. Everything before it is prologue. Everything after it is consequence. We never see it directly. The show gives us glimpses, ruins of our recognizable world embedded in the landscape like fossils. Simon Petrikov's video diaries recorded in the early days of the collapse, Marcelin's fragmented memories of the period immediately after, the silhouette of bombers against a gray sky through a window. The war itself is kept deliberately off-screen, experienced only through its aftermath, which is both narratively smart and genuinely haunting. You learn more about a catastrophe from what it left behind than from watching it happen. And what the Mushroom War left behind is a world so fundamentally transformed that its very laws of nature are different. What we know about the war itself? It was a nuclear conflict. The name suggests mushroom clouds, and the show confirms this through various pieces of evidence scattered across seasons. Based on the technology visible in Simon Petrikov's recordings and the cultural references embedded in the show's DNA, the VHS tapes, the 1980s pop culture references, the style of the cars and clothing, the war most likely occurred somewhere in the late 20th or early 21st century. The details of who fought whom and why remain deliberately obscured. The show is not interested in assigning blame or explaining geopolitical causation. The Mushroom War is not a lesson in history. It is a condition, a before state that explains the after state we inhabit. What matters, for the story of magic, is a single specific weapon. The mushroom bomb. This was not an ordinary nuclear device. Though it was nuclear in origin, it was something worse, something mutagenic. A weapon that did not simply destroy living matter but transformed it at a biological and perhaps even quantum level, rewriting the fundamental instructions that organisms use to understand themselves. When it detonated somewhere in what used to be North America, it did not simply kill, it changed. Everything exposed to its blast radius, every organism that survived the initial detonation and radiation, was altered in ways that should have been impossible under the laws of biology as humanity understood them. The world it created, in the slow centuries following the blast, was the world of Oo. Animals began to think, not the gradual evolutionary development of higher cognitive function over millennia, but rapid, chaotic, individual emergence of consciousness in creatures that had not possessed it before. The radiation acted as a catalyst for mutations that went far beyond the merely physical. Dogs began to understand language. Penguins developed personalities. The remaining scattered human beings watched as the world around them became populated with minds where before there had only been instinct. And the magic returned. This is the crucial thing. The magic of Oo is not an invention of the post-war world. It is a resurrection. It was always there, always part of the fundamental substrate of the planet, held in abeyance during the long technological centuries of human civilization, when the rational, systematic worldview of science kept it compressed and underground. The Mushroom War did not create magic. What it did was blow a hole in the dam that had been holding it back. The mutagenic properties of the bomb acted as what some in-universe lore suggests was a kind of alchemical catalyst, transforming the very air and soil and water of the affected regions into something that could carry and sustain magical energy in a way that ordinary matter could not. The radioactive fallout, rather than simply poisoning the land, restructured it at a level below the merely chemical. It made the world permeable to magic in a way it had not been since before human civilization decided that impossible things were impossible. And once magic returned, it returned completely. Not gradually or in small doses. The compression of centuries of suppression released all at once, and the world was flooded with it the way a lowland floods when a dam bursts. Too much, too fast, too chaotic to organize into anything orderly, but alive. Undeniably, overwhelmingly alive in a way that the pre-war world, for all its achievements and comforts, had never been. The Candy Kingdom did not exist before the war. There were no fire kingdoms, no ice kingdoms, no crystal dimension princesses. There were humans with their cities and their technology and their complicated political problems. And then there were the ruins of all that, with something wild and sweet and strange growing up through the cracks. The magic that came back into the world was not a neutral force. It was colored by what had happened, warped in places, dark in corners that had absorbed the worst of the bomb's energy. The Lich was the clearest expression of this darkness born directly from the mushroom bomb, from the concentrated annihilation energy at the heart of the blast, given consciousness and purpose, and an undying desire to finish what the bomb started. But the Lich is a chapter unto himself, and we will get there. For now, understand that the magic of Oo carries the signature of its birth. The place where it emerged was a place of catastrophe, and the magic that saturates the land holds the memory of that catastrophe within it, the way old wood holds the shape of the fire that once grew around it. This is why Oo is never entirely safe. Why the darkness is always there just below the sweetness. Why even the most whimsical corners of the land can suddenly reveal something genuinely terrifying. The magic of Oo knows where it came from. The survivors of the war, both human and newly mutated, had to navigate this transformed world without any roadmap. Everything they thought they understood about how reality worked had been invalidated. The few humans who remained found themselves sharing a changed landscape with creatures that hadn't existed a generation before. In a world where a sentient bubble of candy biomass was quietly beginning to build a kingdom in what had once been unremarkable terrain, and where a very old man with a very cursed crown was stumbling through the ruins, taking care of a small girl who would one day become one of the most powerful beings in Oo. The magic was back. The world was new. And the creatures who would come to define what magic meant in this new world were already beginning to emerge. The Ice King was already becoming the Ice King. Marceline was already more than just a child. The Mother Gum was already coalescing in the post-war soil, feeling out the edges of its new existence. And somewhere in the distance, something ancient and terrible that the mushroom bomb had awakened was already beginning to move through the ruins, learning the geography of its new home, orienting itself toward its eternal purpose. The land of Oo was not born in a day. It assembled itself slowly, over centuries of post-war adaptation, as the magic settled into the landscape and the survivors, human, mutated, and entirely new, found their places within it. By the time Finn the human is born, roughly 1,000 years after the Mushroom War, the world has been reshaped so completely that the pre-war Earth is essentially mythology, known only through ruins and ancient recordings, and the fragmented memories of beings old enough to have survived the transition. But the magic that defines Oo in Finn's era is the direct descendant of the magic that came flooding back during those first chaotic post-war centuries. The ice crown that Simon Petrikov wore is the same crown that Urgence Evergreen created to fight a comet. Marceline the Vampire Queen's powers are the accumulated abilities of every vampire she killed in the century after the war. Princess Bubblegum is the living embodiment of the candy elemental force that has existed since the Cretaceous period, wearing her latest incarnation in the form of a brilliant, pink, occasionally ruthless monarch. Every piece of magic in Ooh has a lineage, a history, a chain of causation that runs back through the Mushroom War and the ancient elementals and the cosmic comets to something so old it predates the concept of old. The world ended, and then, slowly, impossibly, sweetly, it became something else entirely. Part 3. The ice crown magic that consumes its bearer. There is a crown sitting in a glass case in a museum, waiting for the right scholar to pick it up. Or at least, that is roughly how Simon Petrikov describes it in his video diaries. He was an antiquarian, a collector and scholar of ancient objects, someone who spent his professional life tracing the history of artifacts that most people would walk past without a second glance. He had good instincts. He had an eye for things that mattered. And when he encountered the crown, probably in Scandinavia, possibly in a private collection or an archaeological find, his instincts told him it was significant. He was right. He just had no way of knowing what kind of significant. To understand the ice crown's magic, you have to go back to what we already know about Urgence Evergreen. The crown was designed to grant the wearer's deepest wish. It was designed by the most powerful ice elemental of the Cretaceous era, encoded with the full weight of his considerable magical ability, and built to a single specification. Read the heart. Find the truest desire buried beneath every stated want, and performed preference and conscious intention, and make it real. This sounds like a generous gift. In practice, it is one of the most devastating pieces of magic ever created, because human beings are complicated. The truest desire buried beneath everything else is not always the thing that would make a person happy. It is not always the thing they are even aware of wanting. The crown reaches past reason and social conditioning, and the careful architecture of the self that people build over years of living, and finds the raw thing at the center, the deep want, the one that has been there since before words existed for it. For Urgence Evergreen, his deepest wish and his conscious wish were the same. Destroy the comet. He was old enough and singular enough that he had burned away most of the complexity of desire that makes the crown so dangerous. His want was pure. For his apprentice Gunther, the deepest wish was to be like his master, and the crown obliged, transforming him in the image of what he most truly saw when he looked at Evergreen. For Simon Petrikov, the deepest wish is harder to name precisely because Simon Petrikov is a deeply human person, and deeply human people are full of competing desires that they do not always understand themselves. But what the crown finds, what it latches onto and begins to make real, is something connected to protection, to the desperate desire to keep the people he loves safe. Simon first puts on the crown to protect his fiancée, Betty, during what appears to be one of the early chaotic phases of the Mushroom War. Something is happening outside, something dangerous. He grabs the crown in a moment of crisis, and the crown begins to work. The ice powers come first. He is able to generate cold, to project freezing temperatures outward, to create a shield of ice and snow that serves the immediate purpose of protection. The crown fulfills the expressed wish, the one sitting on the surface of his consciousness in that moment. He wants to protect Betty, and the crown gives him a tool that can do that. But the crown does not stop there, because Urgence Evergreen built it to dig deeper than the surface. And what it finds below the desire to protect Betty, running deeper than any specific wish, is a vast and ancient and somewhat terrifying wellspring of the desire to protect, to shield, to keep the cold and the dark and the dangerous things away from the people who matter. It finds this desire, and it begins to fulfill it at a level that the immediate crisis never required. The crown's transformation of Simon Petrikov is not sudden. This is what makes it so heartbreaking to trace. If it had simply turned him into the Ice King overnight, there would have been no tragedy, only a terrible event. Instead, it works slowly, the way a glacier moves so gradually that no single day shows measurable change. But accumulated over months and years and then centuries, it remakes the landscape completely. He begins to hear voices, to have visions when he wears the crown, strange, fractured images from other times and places. From the long history of previous wearers, from the memories encoded in the artifact itself, the crown is not a neutral tool. It is a magical object with centuries of accumulated intention inside it, and wearing it means opening yourself to all of that. Then comes the behavioral drift. He becomes more erratic, more prone to what he describes in his video diaries as episodes where he is not entirely himself. He says things he does not remember saying. He wakes from stretches of time with no memory of what happened during them. Betty leaves. This is perhaps the most devastating piece of the Ice Crown's work, because it fulfills the letter of Evergreen's design while catastrophically undercutting its spirit. Simon wants to protect Betty. The crown, in the process of fulfilling his deepest desire, makes him into something strange and frightening enough that Betty cannot stay near him. It is protecting him from loss of any kind, even by removing the very person whose safety was the root of everything. And then the Mushroom War comes in earnest, and Simon is alone with the crown, and the crown keeps working on him. His memory goes next. Not all at once, this too is a gradual erosion, the tide coming in over sand, taking a little more with each retreat. The names of people he loved begin to blur. The specifics of who he was before the crown slip away, like details from a half-remembered dream. The things he knows about history and language and ancient artifacts recede behind the noise of the crown's constant magical interference. He is losing himself by centimeters, and he knows it, and he cannot stop it, because without the crown he cannot survive the post-war world. This is the trap that makes the Ice Crown the most insidious magical artifact in all of Uu. Simon is not just wearing something dangerous, he is dependent on something that is killing him softly and slowly. The crown gives him the ice powers that let him survive in a world that has become extraordinarily hostile. It gives him a kind of immortality, keeping him alive well past any normal human lifespan. Without it, he would age and die. With it, he will eventually cease to be Simon Petrikov at all. He chooses to survive. He chooses this with full knowledge, at least in the early years, of what it means. There are recordings of him making the choice consciously, explaining it to a camera in the ruins of the pre-war world, his voice steady even as his eyes show the effort of staying coherent. He knows what the crown is doing to him. He knows he is losing. What Simon Petrikov does with the time the crown buys him in those early post-war years is worth dwelling on. He finds a child, Marceline Abadir, half-demon, daughter of Hunson Abadir, the Lord of Evil, and in the immediate aftermath of the Mushroom War, still a small girl is wandering alone in the ruins of human civilization. Her mother is gone. Her father, who is not precisely the type to be present in a crisis, is not there. She is alone in a world that has just ended. Simon finds her, and in the fragmented time he has left as something like himself, he takes care of her. He sings to her. He performs puppet shows with a bear he finds among the ruins, because she likes bears. He calls himself her Marceline when his grip on his own name starts to slip, confusing the name of the person he loves with the name of who he is. He writes her a note that she carries for 1,000 years, explaining what is happening to him, explaining that he loves her, explaining that the man she knew is going away somewhere the crown is taking him, and that she should not blame the person who remains. The magic of the Ice Crown does not discriminate between what it preserves and what it destroys. It preserves Simon's body, his ice powers, his impossible vitality across 10 centuries of Uu's history. It destroys Simon's mind, his memories, his personality, his connection to everything that made him who he was. It gives him a kind of immortality in exchange for the self that made that immortality worth having. By the time Adventure Time begins, the Ice King, the being that the crown has created from Simon Petrikov's raw material, is a lonely, confused, not quite villain who kidnaps princesses, not from malice but from a desperate need for connection that he cannot properly name. He writes fan fiction about Fiona and Cake, characters he invented, because somewhere deep beneath the layers of ice magic and centuries of accumulated damage, the impulse to create stories about people finding love and friendship and belonging still burns. He cannot access the specific memories of Betty or Marceline or the life he had before the crown. But the emotional need those relationships filled is still there, expressing itself in the only ways the Ice King has available. The crown gave him survival. The crown took everything worth surviving for. And then, at the very end of Adventure Time's main series, Golb arrives in Uu, and in the chaos of that confrontation, something that should have been impossible happens. The Ice King is transformed back into Simon Petrikov. His memories return. His self returns. The Crown's work is, at least temporarily, undone. He survives into the Fiona and Cake spin-off as himself, as Simon, trying to figure out who that even is after 1,000 years of not being it. Which is its own kind of story about what magic costs, what it takes, and whether you can ever fully recover what it changes about you. The Ice Crown is a story about magic that loves you to death, that gives and gives and gives until the giving has consumed everything you were. It is one of the most beautifully written magical artifacts in animation, not because of what it can do, but because of what it cannot undo. Part 4. Marceline and the Language of Vampiric Magic. Somewhere in the early centuries after the Mushroom War, a teenage girl with demon blood in her veins and no particular plan for her future decided to save humanity. Not because anyone asked her to, not because she had a prophecy or a destined role or a cosmic mandate. She did it because she was there, and the vampires were there, and the last scattered remnants of human civilization were being systematically hunted, and she was one of the only beings in the post-war world powerful enough to do something about it. Marceline Abadir's magical abilities at this point in her life were a mixture of inherited demonic power and whatever she had managed to develop through her centuries of existence. As the daughter of Hunson Abadir, Lord of Evil and proprietor of the Nightosphere, a dimension that functions essentially as Adventure Time's hell, she was born with abilities that exceeded what ordinary beings could achieve through training alone. Demons in this universe are not simply evil-coded characters, they are a specific class of magical entity with powers that operate on their own principles, distinct from the magic wielded by elementals or wizards or enchanted artifacts. Hunson Abadir's particular power is the absorption of souls. He is, in the language of Adventure Time's magic system, something that feeds on the spiritual essence of others. This ability, passed to Marceline through her demon heritage, is the key that unlocks what makes her such an extraordinary hunter. But before the vampires, before the hunting and the soul absorption and the gradual accumulation of power that made her the vampire queen, Marceline was a half-demon child who had survived something terrible and was trying to figure out what came next. The post-war world she grew up in was genuinely dangerous in ways that go beyond the normal adventuring dangers of Oo's later, more settled centuries. It was a world in active chaos, physically and magically. The landscape was still transforming. The magic that had flooded back was still finding its level, settling into channels and patterns that would eventually become the stable, if eccentric rules of the land of Oo. But in those early decades, it was wild. Unpredictable, capable of producing genuinely new things with no historical precedent. Vampires were one of those new things. Not entirely new vampirism, has roots going back far beyond the Mushroom War in this universe's mythology. But the post-war flood of magical energy created conditions where vampire populations could expand dramatically and rapidly. With human civilization collapsed and human survivors scattered and isolated, the vampires had both the opportunity and the magical fuel to proliferate. The few humans who remained in the ruins of the pre-war world found themselves additionally menaced by beings that were faster, stronger, and magically endowed in ways that ordinary humans could not effectively counter. Marceline chose to counter them. What she discovered in the course of doing so changed her life permanently and gave her a relationship with magic that is unique in all of Oo. When she killed a vampire, when she staked it, destroyed it, reduced it to the ash, and nothing that vampire death produces, she could absorb its power. The demonic soul absorption ability she had inherited from Hunson could be directed at the residual magical essence of a freshly destroyed vampire, pulling in not just the soul but the specific supernatural gift that had made that vampire distinctive. Every vampire in Adventure Time has a particular power that defines it. One can become invisible, one can fly, one can regenerate at spectacular speed, one can hypnotize, one moves with uncanny speed. Each of these gifts was evolved or acquired over the long history of vampirism in this world, becoming part of the vampiric lineage as surely as the sensitivity to sunlight and the need to feed on the red spectrum of color and life energy. Marceline absorbed them all, one by one, as she hunted down the vampire population of post-war Oo with the methodical patience of someone who has more time than the creatures she is pursuing. She added each power to her own collection. She became more dangerous with each kill, more capable, more impossible to defeat by the narrowing pool of vampires who were still alive to oppose her. The vampires she hunted were, themselves, extraordinary beings. The show names several of the most significant ones through the Stakes miniseries, which revisits Marceline's past through the narrative device of those vampires escaping back into the present when Princess Bubblegum tries to cure Marceline of her vampirism. The Fool grants her the power of flight. The Empress gives her invisibility. The Hierophant lends her a version of the old classic vampiric weaknesses alongside extraordinary physical resilience. The Moon provides regeneration so powerful that it borders on complete immortality. The Vampire King was the last, the most powerful, the one who had, in some sense, been the architect of the post-war vampire surge, or at least its most significant organizing force. Fighting him was different from fighting the others, not just because he was stronger, but because the fight ended in a way that Marceline did not expect and could not simply shake off. She won. She killed him. But in killing him, she was bitten. The Vampire King's bite was not incidental. In the show's mythology, he understood that he was dying, and he made a choice in those final moments that was equal parts practical and philosophical. He bit Marceline to ensure his species' survival. If the most powerful vampire hunter of the age was herself a vampire, the species would continue in her. He seeded his own essence into the only being who had ever managed to kill him. Marceline destroyed him and became what she had spent years hunting. The vampiric transformation layered onto her existing demonic nature created something genuinely new. She was not simply a vampire, as she was not simply a demon. She was both, simultaneously, with the two natures interacting and augmenting each other in ways that no existing framework for understanding either one fully covered. Her demonic heritage meant she was not bound by all the standard vampiric limitations. She could feed on the color red rather than blood specifically. She was not destroyed by sunlight as quickly as purebred vampires would be, though it still weakened her. She retained the soul absorption ability that had made her such an effective hunter, now combined with the enhanced physical capabilities of vampirism. And she had all the powers she had absorbed. Every ability she had taken from every vampire she had ever destroyed now lived inside her permanently, woven into her magic at a level below the merely technical. For 1,000 years, give or take the centuries of Ooze post-war settling, Marceline carried all of this. The history of an entire species compressed into a single body. The weight of what she had done, the hunting, the killing, the becoming and the consequences of that weight, the loneliness of being the only one of her particular kind, the strange half-life of existing somewhere between demon and vampire, and something that had no name. She became a musician. This is not a small thing in the story of Marceline's magic. Music, in Adventure Time's universe, is never merely entertainment. It is a form of emotional expression that, for beings of sufficient magical depth, carries genuine power. Marceline's bass guitar, fashioned from her family's ancestral battle axe, is both a weapon and an instrument of emotional truth. Her songs are often the most honest thing she says out loud, the emotions she cannot or will not speak directly finding a way through melody and lyric instead. The Stakes miniseries resolves this thread with characteristic Adventure Time emotional complexity. Marceline decides she no longer wants to be a vampire. The weight of what she carries the centuries, the absorbed powers, the vampiric history, is something she wants to set down. Princess Bubblegum develops a cure, and Marceline takes it, and the vampiric essence is extracted from her body, which immediately releases all 5 of the most powerful vampires she had absorbed back into the present world. Because the power she had taken from them was not just hers. It was theirs, preserved inside her like specimens in amber. Removing it from Marceline meant returning it to its original owners. She has to hunt them all over again. But this time she has something she did not have the first time. People who will fight alongside her. Princess Bubblegum and Finn and Jake, who in earlier centuries were not yet born to help. By the end of the miniseries, Marceline is bitten again. She is a vampire again. The Vampire King is gone for good this time, his essence dispersed in a way that does not resurrect him. She carries the powers again, but this time they feel different, not burdens she is stuck with, but gifts she has chosen. Tools she has kept knowing what they cost and deciding they are worth it. Marceline's magic is inseparable from her history. You cannot understand what she can do without understanding what she has been through, what she has absorbed, what she has survived. Her power is her autobiography. Every ability she carries is a record of a life lived at the intersection of the demonic, the vampiric, and the stubbornly, defiantly personal. She is, perhaps more than anyone else in Wu, a walking archive of the magic that this world has produced. Part 5. Princess Bubblegum When Science is Magic. Here's a thing that Princess Bubblegum insists, repeatedly, and with considerable emphasis. She does not believe in magic. She believes in science. She believes in observation and hypothesis and experimentation and the gradual accumulation of evidence into testable models that describe how the world works. She has a laboratory and a methodology and an irritation with mystical explanations that she considers sloppy thinking dressed up in robes and surrounded by candles. And she is, simultaneously, the living embodiment of one of Wu's 4 fundamental magical forces, a being literally made of sentient candy biomass who was spontaneously generated by a massive pink biological entity that seeped out of the post-war soil and began developing consciousness the way some people develop hobbies, casually and completely. Princess Bubblegum's relationship with magic is one of the show's finest long-running jokes, because the joke only lands once you understand the depth of her actual entanglement with it. The mother gum is where it begins. In the years following the Mushroom War, as the magic flooded back into the world and the landscape began its transformation into something no pre-war cartographer would have recognized, there arose in some part of what had been ordinary terrain a vast, pink, gelatinous biological entity. Not a creature in any conventional sense, something more fundamental. A manifestation of the candy elemental force, one of the 4 foundational magical energies of the post-Mushroom War world, taking a physical form in response to the new magical saturation of the environment. The mother gum was the embodiment of candy as a cosmic principle. This sounds absurd if you approach it from the perspective of the pre-war world, where candy is simply a category of food. But in Wu's magical cosmology, candy is one of the 4 elements. It is not merely confectionery. It represents a particular register of being sweetness and generativity, and the capacity to sustain life in a specific way, the same way that fire represents transformation, and ice represents preservation, and slime represents the primordial, adaptive quality of life at its most resilient and flexible. From the mother gum, 2 beings separated and developed their own identities. One of them is Nettie, a soft, gentle, profoundly traumatized creature who needs almost nothing from the world except the safety of the candy tree roots he suckles on in the deepest parts of the Candy Kingdom's underground. Nettie provides the life essence that gives the candy people their animation and vitality, a kind of living battery for the kingdom he never interacts with directly. The other is Bonibel Bubblegum. Princess Bubblegum's origin is biological in a way that sits at the exact boundary between science and magic, which is perhaps why she refuses to acknowledge which side of that boundary she falls on. She is a being of candy biomass, actual gum, shaped into the form of a young woman through the organizing principle of the candy elemental force, and then animated into consciousness by whatever spark turns complex biological systems into genuinely experiencing minds. She is made of the stuff. She can deform and reform her own body. She can fluctuate her biological age by adding or removing biomass. She regrew from a partial collection of candy pieces after the lich-possessed version of herself was destroyed and reassembled. She is, by any reasonable definition, a magical creature. But she is also a scientist of extraordinary capability, and the science is not a costume she puts over the magic. The science is how she expresses the elemental force she embodies. The candy elemental, across all its incarnations through history, is generative, creative. It makes things. It sustains things. It is the element most associated with the building and nurturing of life. And Princess Bubblegum's scientific work, her creation of the candy people, her genetic engineering and robotic construction and chemically aided agriculture and mechanical innovation, is the expression of that elemental generativity in the specific language of an extraordinarily intelligent being who happens to live in a post-apocalyptic world with ready access to unusual materials. She built the Candy Kingdom from nothing, starting in the early post-war centuries and continuing across hundreds of years of her unnaturally extended lifespan. She created citizens. Not metaphorically, she literally made the candy people, engineering them from candy materials using techniques that combined genuine biochemical understanding with her elemental ability to shape and animate candy matter. The Earl of Lemongrab, one of her most infamous creations, was an early attempt at an heir that went somewhat catastrophically sideways. producing a being of extraordinary sensitivity and limited social comprehension, who screams at people when he is upset and considers everything and everyone within his vicinity acceptable targets for his administrative authority. Even her failed creations are extraordinary. Lemon grab functions. He is not what bubblegum intended, but he exists, with a complete psychological interior and genuine emotional responses, and a relationship to his own existence that, while unusual, is undeniably real. Creating a person who turns out differently than you planned is still creating a person. The candy elemental magic she embodies allows her to extend these creative abilities beyond what pure science could achieve. When she is operating at full elemental capacity, she can transform not just candy materials but other substances into candy. She can spread the candy principle outward, converting whatever she touches into her element. In the Elements miniseries, when the elementals are each pushed to the extreme of their power, Bubblegum accidentally transforms much of ooh into candy, converting beings who were previously other things into candy versions of themselves. This is the elemental magic operating without the scientific mediation she normally imposes on it. Raw, total, slightly overwhelming. Her age is another aspect of the magical strangeness she refuses to entirely acknowledge. She is 827 years old. 827. She looks 18. She is an immortal being who has watched centuries of ooze history unfold around her, who has built and defended and occasionally compromised her kingdom across a timescale that no human being and very few magical beings can match. The candy biomass that constitutes her physical form does not age in any conventional sense. She endures. What this extended lifespan has done to Princess Bubblegum is one of the show's most complex and honest character studies. She is kind, genuinely, in the way that someone who has chosen to devote centuries to building something for others can be kind. She is also ruthless in ways that a person with less experience of how badly things can go wrong when you are insufficiently ruthless sometimes finds disturbing. She has made decisions that her much younger friend Finn finds morally troubling, and she has made them with full awareness of the trade-offs involved, because she has lived long enough to see what happens when those decisions are not made. The candy elemental's magic is not just the power to make candy. It is the burden of caring for things for so long that the caring itself changes shape. Claw becomes something less warm and more architectural. Something that knows it will outlast individual relationships and must therefore plan for scale and duration rather than just depth. Princess Bubblegum is proof that you can be made of magic and still approach the world like a scientist, can hold both things simultaneously, can refuse to name what you are while still being entirely, irrevocably, beautifully it. Part 6. The Four Elementals and the Architecture of Ooze Magic. The Land of Oo runs on 4 engines. They are ancient, these engines. They predate the Mushroom War by geological timescales. They predate human civilization by epochs. They were running when the dinosaurs walked the earth, and will still be running when whatever comes after Oo has long since forgotten that Oo existed. Fire, ice, candy, slime. These are not arbitrary choices. The 4 elements of Adventure Time's magical cosmology represent something genuinely different from the 4 classical elements of Western alchemy. Earth, air, fire, and water are the elements of transformation in the medieval magical tradition, the building blocks of matter as pre-scientific philosophy understood it. Oo's 4 elements are something else. They are modes of being, registers of how life and matter can organize themselves, qualities of existence rather than qualities of substance. Fire is transformation, urgency, passion, the willingness to consume and be consumed in the process of making something new. The Fire Kingdom burns perpetually. Flame Princess, the current incarnation of the Fire Elemental when the main series takes place, carries all of that quality within her, the impulsiveness, the ferocity, the genuine warmth coexisting with the capacity for destruction. She cannot help but burn. It is not a character flaw. It is the fundamental nature of the element she embodies. Ice is preservation, isolation, the capacity to hold things in suspension indefinitely. Ice does not destroy, it stops. It keeps things from changing by reducing everything to stillness. The ice elemental across its incarnations tends toward control, toward a desire to hold the world in a specific configuration and prevent it from shifting. Urgence Evergreen wanted to stop a comet from ending the world as he knew it. Simon Petrikov, through the crown, became something that created ice and cold wherever he went. keeping himself suspended across 1,000 years of history that should have killed him long ago. Candy is generativity, warmth, sweetness, in its most fundamental sense, the quality of sustaining and nurturing. It creates, it feeds, it makes things live and keeps them living. The Candy Kingdom is the most populous and architecturally elaborate of Ooze elemental domains, because the Candy elemental principle is fundamentally oriented toward building and maintaining and sustaining complex systems of interdependent life. Slime is harder to name precisely, which feels right for slime. Slime is adaptive, primordial, the element that recalls the original conditions under which life first emerged, the warm, viscous, undifferentiated soup from which everything else eventually climbed. The slime elemental tends toward accommodation, transformation, the capacity to shift shape without losing essential nature. Slime Princess, in the Elements arc, becomes overwhelming, not through force but through absorption. She draws things into the slime, makes them part of the collective fluid, erases distinction in favor of a kind of universal belonging. According to Patience Street Pym, the ice elemental who had the foresight to freeze herself beneath the ocean before the Mushroom War and then thaw out 1,000 years later in the present, there have been elemental embodiments since life first began on Earth. Every time one dies, their soul cycles into a new body. The element is never unrepresented. The force continues even when the individual vessel does not. Patience Street Pym herself is a fascinating figure in the history of Ooze elemental magic. She is the only known elemental to have deliberately survived the gap between the pre-war and post-war world by removing herself from it, freezing herself in suspended animation, preserving her elemental essence across the centuries of chaos and transformation, and emerging in the modern land of Ooh with memories that no other living being possesses. She remembers what the world was like before the war. She remembers the early elementals. She has a perspective on the history of elemental magic that is genuinely unique. She is also responsible for one of the most significant magical events in the main series. In the Elements story arc, Patience, frustrated by what she sees as the current generation of elementals' failure to recognize and properly use their power, attempts to artificially awaken all 4 elementals to their full potential. Simultaneously, her plan is not malicious in its intention. She genuinely believes she is doing something necessary, something that will make Ooh more powerful and better able to face the darkness she knows is coming. But she underestimates the instability of artificially awakened elemental magic, and what happens instead of the controlled awakening she envisioned is a catastrophic runaway expansion of all 4 elemental forces at once. Flame Princess becomes overwhelmed by fire, transforming everything around her into flame. Princess Bubblegum expands the candy principle outward, converting the inhabitants of her kingdom into candy versions of themselves. Slime Princess pulls everything she encounters into the slime. The ice elemental force, working through the Ice King who is caught in the expansion, begins spreading cold and depression across the landscape. Ooh nearly dissolves into 4 competing versions of itself, each one a monoculture of a single element, the balance that makes the land livable sacrificed for the sake of elemental purity. What saves it is anti-magic. Lumpy Space Princess, the floating, magnificently self-absorbed princess of Lumpy Space, who has spent the entire Elements arc being deeply annoyed at everyone and everything, while maintaining a running commentary on how put upon she is, turns out to be made of anti-elemental magic. This is not something she chose or developed or even knew about herself. It is simply what she is, a being whose fundamental nature is the negation of elemental force, existing in blissful ignorance of her own cosmic significance, right up until the moment the world needs her. When she touches the transformed inhabitants of Ooh, the elemental magic is cancelled. The candy people become themselves again. The fire people stop burning, the ice people thaw, the slime retreats. The land is restored to its complicated, mixed, argumentative, beautiful self, where fire and ice and candy and slime coexist in the balance that the world requires. It is quintessentially adventure time that the character who saves the world from the consequences of cosmic elemental magic is the one who was complaining the loudest the entire time and had absolutely no idea she was important. The 5th element, lumps, is not officially part of the classic elemental framework. Patience does not account for it. The ancient elementals of Evergreen's era did not include a lump elemental in their deliberations. It is something outside the system, the variable that the system cannot anticipate, the thing that does not fit the model and therefore breaks the model's monopoly on determining how things work. Anti-magic as a force in Adventure Time is not simply the absence of magic. It is a positive quality of its own. The ability to negate elemental force is itself an elemental force, the way that absence and presence are both real properties rather than one being merely the lack of the other. Lumpy Space Princess embodies this anti-magic not through any achievement or training but through the accident of what she is, which Adventure Time always presents as the most reliable kind of power, the kind you cannot lose because you cannot separate it from yourself. The 5 elemental kingdoms of ooh candy, fire, ice, slime, and the lumpy space that technically exists in a pocket dimension rather than on ooh's surface represent the 5 fundamental registers of magical reality in this world. Everything else in ooh's magic landscape is either a combination of these elements or a relationship to them. The wizards and enchanted objects and cosmic entities and vampires all exist within a world that the elementals define at its deepest level, even when those beings are not consciously aware of it. Part 7. The Lich Magic Born of Pure Extinction. In a world full of interesting evil, the Lich is in a category by himself. Most antagonists in Adventure Time want something. They want power, or recognition, or love, or revenge, or freedom from something that constrains them. The Ice King kidnaps princesses because he desperately wants companionship and has lost the ability to seek it appropriately. The Vampire King propagated his species because he wanted it to survive. Even Hunson Abadir, Lord of Evil, has the specific and humanish desire to have his daughter respect and understand him. The Lich wants none of those things. The Lich wants extinction, the end of all life, the silence of every voice and the stillness of every heartbeat. He wants the universe scrubbed clean of the noise and mess and impermanence of living things, return to the cold, quiet peace of a cosmos that has finally stopped producing anything as inconvenient as consciousness. This desire is not pathological in the sense of being a deviation from his nature. It is his nature. The Lich is not a being who has been warped by trauma into wanting destruction. He is destruction, given form and purpose, and the intelligence to pursue that purpose with terrible patience. His origin goes back further than the Mushroom War, further than human civilization, further than the recognizable history of the Earth. The purple catalyst comet that appears in the Season 6 finale tells Finn something that reframes everything about the Lich's existence, that both Finn and the Lich have, at various points in the deep history of the universe, been incarnations of the catalyst comet force. The Lich was the comet that ended the age of the dinosaurs, the green, horn-crowned comet of the Cretaceous period that Urgent's Evergreen was trying to stop when he built his magical crown. The comet that killed everything and remade the world in its impact? The Lich is, in other words, not simply an enemy that arose within ooh's history. He is a force that predates ooh by 65 million years. He is a cosmic constant, the universe's periodic desire to hit the reset button expressed as a being with will and awareness, and the magical power to pursue that desire. The mutagenic bomb of the Mushroom War gave him physical form. Before it, the Lich existed as something more abstract, a force, an intention, a will without a specific body to inhabit. The bomb's energy, concentrated and specifically mutagenic in its properties, provided the raw material and the activation spark that he needed to take shape in the post-war world. He arose from the explosion itself, a being made of the desire for extinction crystallized by the most destructive act that human civilization ever managed to produce. His magical abilities reflect his nature completely. He does not create, he does not sustain. Every power he possesses is oriented toward ending, decaying, and emptying. He can induce rot with his touch, turning living matter into ruin as he walks through it. He can project a green magical fire from his hands that does not simply burn, but unmakes. He can control minds with a proximity effect. Simply being near the Lich begins to infect the thoughts of beings who are not well shielded, introducing whispers of hopelessness and the seductive pull of giving up. He can possess other beings, inhabiting their bodies and using them as vehicles while their own consciousness is either suppressed or destroyed. He possesses Princess Bubblegum and nearly kills her. He possesses the snail in order to free himself from the amber prison where Billy had trapped him. He wears Billy's corpse like a suit in order to access the Enchiridion and use it to tear a hole in reality to reach the multiverse-spanning reality of Prismo's time room. Each of these possessions is a form of violation, the taking of a living being's body, the overwriting of their will with his own, the use of their physical form to further his purposes while their consciousness is either helpless inside or completely absent. The Enchiridion, when he finally uses it as intended, is a key to the multiverse, a map to every timeline and dimension. And the Lich's plan? Once he reaches Prismo and makes his wish, I wish for the extinction of all life, is to extend his work across not just but every version of every reality that has ever existed. He does not want to win in this timeline. He wants to win everywhere, forever. The hero Billy spent his life fighting the Lich and managed to imprison him in the amber of an ancient tree that became the foundation of the Candy Kingdom. This imprisonment lasted for some time, before the Lich found a way to use the snail to break free. The fact that the Candy Kingdom was built, at least in part, over and around a prison holding the most destructive being in the history of the world is a detail that Adventure Time presents without comment, which is somehow the most perfect choice it could make. Finn eventually turns the Lich into a baby. This is one of the stranger moments in a show full of strange moments. The Guardian of the Crystal Citadel heals the Lich with blood that is itself a form of magical transformation, and the accumulated centuries of darkness and destructive purpose are somehow reversed by the specific properties of that healing magic, leaving behind a pudgy, cheerful infant who has no idea he used to be the most terrifying thing in the multiverse. This child, adopted by Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig and named Sweet Pea, is one of Adventure Time's most sustained contradictions. He is, by all observable evidence, an ordinary happy child. He likes his adoptive parents. He goes to school, he has friends, and he also periodically blacks out into Lich mode when sufficiently frightened or threatened, the ancient extinction force inside him briefly breaking through the cheerful surface before subsiding again. The episode Whispers resolves this in a way that is both emotionally satisfying and cosmically appropriate. Sweet Pea encounters a fragment of the Lich's essence still active, still pursuing its purpose, still trying to reclaim its body and its mission. And Sweet Pea, not through magical power or fighting ability, but through sheer force of his own genuine existence as a person who loves his family and wants to go home, defeats it. The Lich inside him is not destroyed, but it is overcome. Sweet Pea, the innocent child who should not exist, who was made from the ruins of the most nihilistic force in the universe by the healing magic of a cosmic prison's guardian, proves that the desire to live and love and be loved is more fundamental than the desire for extinction. The Lich's magic is the inverse of everything else in Ooh. Where Bubblegum's magic builds, the Lich's destroys. Where Marceline's magic accumulates and preserves power, the Lich's power drains and unmakes. Where the Ice Crown sustains its wearer across centuries, the Lich's touch accelerates the end of everything it contacts. He is the shadow that makes the light comprehensible, the proof that the magic of Ooh is not simply about possibility and transformation, but about a conflict between creation and destruction that has been ongoing since the universe first decided to start producing things rather than remaining a blank. Part 8. Magic Man, Mars, and Magic Beyond Ooh. Magic does not begin and end in the land of Ooh. This is something the show makes clear slowly and then suddenly. The same way that a fog clears first, you notice individual shapes, then the whole landscape resolves at once. Mars exists. Abraham Lincoln was the king of Mars. Preserved by the magic of the planet, he ruled long past any normal lifespan until he chose to sacrifice himself so that Jake could live. Grob Gob Glob Grod, the four-headed deity worshipped by much of Ooh's population as a god or series of gods, is a Martian. The land of Ooh is a magical place, but it is not the only magical place, not even in its own solar system. Magic Man is the best guide we have to the magic that operates beyond Ooh's borders, because he is both intimately connected to Martian magic and has spent a significant portion of his existence messing with Ooh's inhabitants in ways that reveal the difference in quality and scale between what passes for magic in the land of Ooh and what magic actually means in the broader context of the universe. His real name, before the catastrophe that gave him his working title, was never given as distinct from Magic Man in the show, though after his redemption arc, he becomes known as King Man, which suggests that Magic Man was always something of a professional designation. He was a Martian. He was renowned throughout Mars for his magical abilities, considered extraordinary even by the standards of a civilization advanced enough to have produced Abraham Lincoln as their king and Grob Gob Glob Grod as their champions. He was also in love, deeply and specifically, with a woman named Margles. Margles is the pivot point of Magic Man's story. She is what he had before everything went wrong, the ground he stood on, the specific warmth that made the rest of his existence feel organized and purposeful. When Adventure Time explores Magic Man's past in the episode You Forgot Your Floaties, and in the backstory it sketches through Grob Gob Glob Grod's appearances, Margles is the constant. The thing that was there and then was taken. Golb took her. Golb is a subject we will explore at length in a dedicated chapter, but the relevant detail here is that Golb is a being of pure chaos, an entity that exists outside the normal order of the universe and periodically tears through it, taking things and transforming them in ways that cannot be reversed by any magic that operates within the universe's own rules. Golb attacked Mars. Margles was taken, and Magic Man, who was a renowned magical practitioner with the resources of Mars behind him, could not get her back. He tried. He used every tool he had. He found his way to Prismo and attempted to wish her back, but the wish failed in some way that the show does not specify precisely, either because of the specific rules around Golb's transformations or because the nature of what had happened to Margles made the wish ungrantable. He built a weapon in her image, Margles, a magical, automated resistance-generating laser energy supplier, positioned atop Olympus Mons as a planetary defense against Golb's return. He poured everything he had into these attempts. None of them worked, and something in Magic Man broke. Not metaphorically, literally. The show presents his mental breakdown as a kind of structural failure in his relationship to other beings suffering. He stopped being able to care about people's pain, or rather, he stopped being able to integrate that caring with his behavior. He could observe suffering, could notice it, could understand intellectually that it was happening, but the ability to let that observation change what he did was damaged. He was exiled to Earth by Grob Gob Glob Grod for 200 years, punishment for the crimes he had committed against the Martian population in the years following his breakdown. These crimes were essentially using magic to make life miserable for the people around him. Not from cruelty exactly, but from the same impaired empathic function that made him indifferent to suffering, turning everyone on Mars bald by transforming all the water into hair, making random passers-by experience things that were disorienting and frightening and occasionally degrading. The small, pointless torments of someone who has lost the emotional machinery that makes other people's experience feel real. On Earth, in Oo, Magic Man continued, he transformed people into body parts for no particular reason. He led Finn and Jake through a sequence of destabilizing experiences in the episode Freak City that had no purpose except the vague amusement that watching others navigate chaos provided him. He was not the Lich. He did not want extinction. He just did not care enough about the consequences of his actions to stop producing them. This makes him a fascinating figure in the taxonomy of magical beings in Oo because he is the clearest example of what happens when extraordinary magical power is decoupled from emotional health. The Lich is evil by design. Magic Man is broken by grief. The magic is the same in both cases, vast, capable, able to reshape individual experiences in significant ways, but what drives it is completely different. The Lich's destructive magic is purposeful. Magic Man's destructive magic is purposeless. He is a hurricane that has forgotten it has a direction. His redemption comes through Betty Groff, of all people. Betty, brilliant, determined, magically capable in ways she developed specifically to save Simon Petrikov from the Ice Crown, works with Magic Man in ways that ultimately contribute to his recovery of something like emotional function. The journey is complicated and involves significantly more magical weirdness than can be summarized easily, but the endpoint is meaningful. Magic Man becomes King Man, recovers something like his original self, and returns to Mars to help rebuild what his breakdown destroyed. The Martian magic that Magic Man and Grob Gob Glob Grod and Abraham Lincoln represent is not fundamentally different from the magic of Oo in its mechanics, but it exists at a different scale. Martian magical practitioners seem to operate with greater precision and range than most of Oo's magic users. The devices and abilities they deploy, the magic-draining technology Grob Gob Glob Grod uses to slow Magic Man, the teleportation systems Lincoln employs, The planet-scale defenses Magic Man constructed suggest a civilization that has had much longer to develop and systematize its magical knowledge than the post-war world of Wu. Magic in Adventure Time's universe is not unique to the land of Wu. It saturates the solar system, and presumably the universe, though at different concentrations and with different qualities depending on the history and nature of each location. The magical richness of Wu is specifically a consequence of the Mushroom War and the return of suppressed magical energy. Mars has its own magical tradition, older and, in some ways, more sophisticated, derived from the long, uninterrupted civilization that produced beings capable of managing a planet. Neither is superior. They are simply different expressions of the same underlying principle, that the universe is made of more than physics, and that some beings and places have found ways to access and work with the more. Part 9. The Catalyst Comets and the Cosmic Magic Cycle. Every 1,000 years, something falls from the sky. It arrives with force and intention, striking the Earth in a moment of cosmic punctuation, a pause and resume in the long narrative of what this world is and what it is becoming. It brings with it an agent of change. Sometimes this change is terrible. Sometimes it is liberation. Sometimes it is both. And the difference between those interpretations depends entirely on who is standing in the impact zone when it arrives and what they needed the world to become. The Catalyst Comets are the oldest magic in Wu's universe. Older than the elementals, older than the Lich, older than the civilizations that rose and fell on Earth before the Mushroom War. They are cyclical by nature, predictable in their rhythm if not in their content, recurring visitors from some point in the cosmic machinery of the universe that functions as a kind of periodic recalibration system. Each comet is an incarnation of a force or principle. The green, horned comet of the Cretaceous era carried the Lich, the extinction force, the drive to end life that periodically reasserts itself in cosmic history. The blue comet, whose impact in deep prehistory is connected to the origins of life on Earth, carried something opposite a generative force, the spark of life and intelligence that is also connected to the soul of Finn the human across his long cycle of reincarnations. A yellow comet, which the ancient entity Orgolorg attempted to intercept and absorb before being defeated by Grob Gob Glob Grod, carried cosmic knowledge and power of a kind that would have been catastrophically dangerous in the wrong hands. And the purple comet, which arrives in the present-day Wu of the show's 6th season, carries the offer of transcendence, an invitation for a soul to abandon physical form and join the cosmic cycle directly, to become something beyond the constraints of mortal or even immortal existence. Finn's connection to the Catalyst Comets is one of the most significant pieces of magical lore in the entire show, and it recontextualizes everything about his position in Wu's history. He is not simply the last human boy, the lucky survivor, the adventurer whose heroism is the product of his individual character. He is the current incarnation of a cosmic force that has been reborn into physical form repeatedly across the deep history of the planet, always as an agent of change, always carrying within him the particular magical essence that the blue comet originally deposited on a world that had not yet produced life. Finn and the Lich are mirror images in this framework. Both are incarnations of Catalyst Comet forces. Both have cycled through history in different forms, always in opposition, always occupying opposite poles of the fundamental tension between life and extinction. The Lich is old death, Finn is new life. They are bound together by the structure of the universe in a way that neither of them chose, two expressions of a cosmic argument that has been ongoing since before either of them existed in any recognizable form. The purple comet's offer to Finn is an invitation to step out of this cycle, to stop being the physical incarnation and become the cosmic force directly, leaving behind the specific, mortal, delightfully chaotic existence of being a boy who lives in a treehouse with a magical dog and has adventures. The comet frames this as enlightenment, as the next step, as the graduation from the limited existence of physical form into something vast and eternal and free from the constraints that make physical existence both painful and beautiful. Finn says no. He says no because he has been paying attention. He has lived fully in his specific, physical, limited, wonderful life. He has friends and a home and a world he loves, and the offer to become something cosmic and grand and formless does not feel to him like an improvement. It feels like a trade he does not want to make. He is not refusing transcendence out of fear or ignorance. He is refusing it out of knowing himself, out of clarity about what he values and what he would be giving up. His father Martin accepts in his stead. Martin, Finn's biological father, a charming and fundamentally irresponsible man who has spent Finn's lifetime absent and who is, at this point in the story, genuinely trying to do something that matters, takes the comet's offer. He transforms. He becomes part of the cosmic cycle. Whether this is the best decision Martin ever made or simply the most dramatic is left, in Adventure Time's usual fashion, productively ambiguous. Orga-Lorg, the entity that is trapped in the body of Gunther the Penguin until revealed in the Season 6 finale, deserves particular mention here because his story illuminates the power and the danger of catalyst comet energy in uniquely concrete terms. Orga-Lorg is a being so ancient and powerful that he predates any recognizable historical record in Adventure Time's universe. He was, at some point in the deep past, a primordial monster of sufficient capability to threaten the catalyst comet directly, not just to survive its impact but to intercept it, absorb its power, and integrate the comet's cosmic energy into himself. Grob Gob Glob Grod, under orders from Abraham Lincoln, King of Mars, stopped him. The specific method was devastating in its simplicity. They crushed him, not destroyed him, but pressed him so thoroughly under the gravitational force of Earth's surface that the body capable of threatening comets was compressed into something much smaller, much less powerful, physically incapable of the scale he had previously operated at. A penguin? He spent thousands of years as a penguin. The grandiose ambitions and cosmic memories of Orga-Lorg crammed into a small body with adorable flippers and no obvious means of pursuing world domination. The Ice King's possession of Gunther, the Ice King who always names his penguins Gunther, across hundreds of them, without explanation, is not incidental to Orga-Lorg's story. The magical environment the Ice King creates and maintains, the millennia of accumulated ice magic surrounding the Ice Kingdom, provided Orga-Lorg with just enough magical nourishment to preserve his consciousness across the long imprisonment. The Ice King sustained his captor without knowing it, which is entirely the sort of thing that Adventure Time constructs without announcing. The catalyst comets are the largest-scale magic in Adventure Time's cosmology, operating at a level above the elementals and the Lich and the ancient Martian civilizations. They are the universe adjusting itself, using specific agents to introduce specific changes into the ongoing experiment of life on Earth. Every 1,000 years, something falls from the sky, and everything changes, just a little, just enough, in whatever direction the universe has decided is necessary, for whatever reason the universe has never bothered to explain. Part 10. Golb, the source of all chaos magic. Before order, there was chaos. Before the elementals, before the catalyst comets, before the slow returning of magic to a post-war world, before any of the structures and systems and relationships that give OO its particular character, there was a force that exists in relationship to all of those things, the way that dissolution relates to form. Not their opposite, not their enemy in any simple sense. Something more fundamental and more disturbing than either. Golb. The show does not tell us what Golb stands for, if it stands for anything. The show does not tell us much about Golb at all, and this absence of explanation is itself the most informative thing about what Golb is. Some things in Adventure Time's universe have backstories and motivations and relationships and contexts that make them comprehensible, that allow you to trace the chain of causation back to something understandable. Golb has none of these things. Golb simply is. Golb has always been. Golb does not explain itself, and the universe does not require it to, because Golb is not a being who operates within the universe's rules. Golb is older than the rules. The most precise description the show offers is this. Golb is the incarnation of chaos and disorder. Where the universe tends towards structure, where the elemental forces organize matter and the catalyst comets, redirect history and the magical systems of various beings impose pattern and meaning on the raw material of existence. Golb is the reversal of all of that. Golb is what happens when structure fails, when meaning dissolves, when the things that have been organized and meaningful and connected to each other come apart in ways that no force within the organized universe can reverse. The Lich calls himself, at one point in the later seasons, the last scholar of Golb. This is one of the most interesting pieces of information the show provides about Golb, because it suggests a relationship between the extinction force and the chaos force that goes beyond simple alliance. The Lich studies Golb. He considers Golb relevant to his own mission, to the work of ending all life. This implies that Golb's chaos and the Lich's extinction are related but distinct, that they serve similar ultimate ends through different means, that the Lich sees in Golb a kind of predecessor or counterpart rather than a rival. What Golb does when it manifests in the physical world is documented through the stories of Magic Man and Margles, and then through the events of the series finale. It transforms. It takes things out of the organized universe and transforms them into something that cannot be brought back by any magic that operates within the universe's rules. Margles was taken by Golb. Magic Man's attempts to recover her, including his effort with Prismo, failed completely, because the wish to bring her back would require undoing something that Golb had done, and Golb's changes are, by definition, beyond the reach of the organized universe's restorative capacity. In Come Along With Me, the series finale of the main Adventure Time run, Golb manifests in the land of Oo. This is not a planned arrival. Betty Groff summons Golb, or more precisely creates the conditions for Golb's manifestation, as part of her extended and increasingly desperate attempt to save Simon from the Ice Crown. Betty's journey across the later seasons of Adventure Time is one of the show's most heartbreaking secondary arcs. A woman of extraordinary intelligence and genuine magical capability who loves Simon Petrikov so completely and so painfully that she cannot stop pursuing his rescue even when every path she explores turns into a trap. She studies magic. She gains power. She allies with Magic Man, works through his memories, develops her own considerable abilities. She does all of this for Simon, always, only for Simon. Her plan involving Golb is the endpoint of this trajectory. She believes that Golb's chaos might be the answer to the problem of the Ice Crown, that a force outside the universe's rules might be able to undo what no force within those rules can address. She is not wrong about the logic. She is wrong about what it costs. Golb arrives. Golb's presence is immediately catastrophic. The organized reality of the candy and fire and ice and slime and all the complicated, beloved, ridiculous life that has built itself up across 1,000 years of post-war recovery begins to dissolve in Golb's vicinity. Golb's body is a site of unmaking. Inside Golb's digestive system, things come apart at the level of what they fundamentally are. Finn and Jake are swallowed, and inside Golb, their existences begin to unravel. Jake's stretchy powers disappear. The things they are most essentially begin to be questioned by Golb's corrosive presence. Simon is transformed back into himself in Golb's maw. The Ice Crown's magic, subjected to Golb's chaos, is broken. Simon Petrikov returns, fully, for the first time in 1,000 years. He gets to be himself again, in the worst possible circumstances, surrounded by chaos he cannot fight, saved by the same force that is destroying everything. Betty understands what she has to do, and she does it, and it is devastating. She wears the Ice Crown. She has recovered her humanity enough, her Simonness, her love for him, that her deepest wish when she wears the crown is not the destruction of the comet. Her deepest wish is to save Simon. And the crown, reading this wish, begins to fulfill it. She makes a wish through the crown, through her own magic, through whatever mechanism is available to her that Golb be contained. The wish requires a price. Betty and Golb merge. They become Golb Betty, a new entity that is neither Betty nor Golb but something that contains elements of both, a synthesis of chaos and love and sacrifice that the universe has never before produced. This entity removes itself from taking Golb's destructive presence away from the land it was unmaking, at the cost of Betty's individual existence. She is gone. Simon is himself. The land of survives. Golb Betty returns in the Fiona and Cake spin-off, this merged entity still in existence, still carrying whatever Betty wanted somewhere in its vast chaotic being. The show suggests that love, in sufficient quantity and of sufficient depth, does not simply dissolve into chaos even when chaos is what it merges with. That something of what Betty was persists inside the entity she became, the same way that the desire to protect persisted inside the Ice Crown through every wearer, the same way that elemental essences persist through death and reincarnation, the same way that everything meaningful in this universe seems to resist the clean endings that Golb represents. Golb is the oldest thing in cosmology, the most powerful in a certain sense, a power measured not in the ability to do things but in the ability to undo them. Golb does not build kingdoms or grant wishes, or create candy people or fight vampires. Golb unmakes. And against making, against creation, against the stubborn insistence on building and sustaining and loving that characterizes everything from Princess Bubblegum's laboratory to Jake's friendship with Finn to Prismo's pickle jar. Against all of that, Golb is the thing that says none of it has to last. But in Ooh, none of it has to last is not the last word. The last word is that it was real, that it happened. That the Candy Kingdoms and the Vampire Queens and the Ice Wizards and the ordinary boys in silly hats who decided to be heroes all existed, fully, beautifully, impossibly, in the same world and the same history, and Golb did not get to unmake them before they had their chance to matter. Part 11. Magic in Daily Ooh Life Wizards, Dark Arts, and Stretchy Dogs. Not all of magic is cosmic catastrophe. Not all of it is ancient elementals and extinction forces and entities older than the concept of time, making decisions that reshape the trajectory of all life in the multiverse. Most of magic, in the everyday lived experience of the land of Ooh, is considerably more ordinary than that. Ordinary in the sense that it is local and personal and woven into the daily rhythms of a world that has simply accepted the impossible as normal. Wizard City is the administrative heart of Ooh's organized magical community, a place accessible only to those who know the password and concealed from the general population, not out of secrecy exactly, but out of the specific elitism that seems to develop whenever any specialized group gets to decide who counts as a real member. The password is Wizard's Rule, which is both the simplest possible password and a completely accurate description of the Wizard's collective self-image. The Wizards of Ooh are competitive, hierarchical, and deeply invested in the idea that their particular relationship to magic is the correct and superior one. They hold Wizard Battles tournaments where practitioners compete to demonstrate their abilities, with strict rules about what constitutes a legitimate magical duel and considerable social consequence attached to winning or losing. The Ice King is banned from these battles for cheating, which he did by bringing nunchucks, which is technically against the rules but also an extremely pragmatic solution to the problem of fighting someone with ice powers when you are the Ice King with ice powers. The magic that wizards use in Ooh is largely structured and learnable, unlike the elemental magic that the elementals embody or the cosmic magic of the Catalyst comets. It has schools and techniques and specific spells with specific effects. The Wizard Village episode demonstrates this by showing Finn and Jake going through the process of becoming wizards, completing various challenges, and receiving powers in return, stored in their wizard robes until they need them. The powers include flight, portal creation, invisibility, and the ability to shoot magical energy in various useful configurations. What is notable about this system is that it works. It is not particularly elegant or deeply theorized by the people using it, but the magic functions according to reliable rules that practitioners can learn and apply. This is different from what Bubblegum does, which is intuitive and elemental, and different from what the Lich does, which is intrinsic and cosmically sourced, and different from what Marceline does, which is accumulated and biographical. Wizard magic in Ooh is, in a meaningful sense, the most workmanlike variety, the magic of people who have systematized a connection to the world's magical field and learned to draw on it in consistent ways. Peppermint Butler is the most interesting example of Ooh's everyday magical landscape precisely because he represents the kind of magic that the show treats with consistent, understated dark humor. He is Princess Bubblegum's butler. He brings her tea, he manages the household. He is, in all outward appearances, a competent and pleasant and slightly formal professional in service to a candy monarch. He is also a practitioner of dark magic. Death knows him by name and owes him a favor. He has a collection of magical artifacts that no butler should reasonably possess. He trades in forbidden knowledge with the calm efficiency of someone who has been doing so for so long that it no longer requires conscious moral evaluation. In the Wizard City storyline of the Distant Lands specials, it is revealed that he has been practicing dark magic since very early in his existence, that his particular relationship to the dark arts is not an aberration but a fundamental part of who he is. The show never resolves this tension into a simple judgment. Peppermint Butler is good. In the meaningful sense, he cares about Princess Bubblegum and the Candy Kingdom, he acts to protect them, he is competent and loyal, and genuinely helpful in ways that matter. He is also deep into territory that the show consistently codes as dangerous and morally ambiguous. The dark arts he practices are real, have real consequences, come from real places. He is not performing darkness, he is genuinely in it. This is true of much of Oo's ambient magic, the ordinary, daily life of a magical world variety that the show populates its background with. The witch who runs the magical shop in Witch's Garden. The various vendors who sell cursed objects and enchanted supplies in the markets of whatever town the episode is set in. The enchanters and sorcerers and hexers who exist in the margins of the show's world, going about their magical business in ways that occasionally interact with the main characters and occasionally do not. Jake the dog is his own category, because his abilities, while magical in the sense of being impossible under normal physics, have a specific and unusual origin that distinguishes them from both wizard magic and elemental magic. Jake can stretch. He can change his size, his shape, his density, his form. He can become a boat, a house, a very large hammer, a very small ball that fits in a thimble. He can extend any part of himself to enormous scale and maintain that extension indefinitely. He can flatten himself to pass under doors and expand himself to fill rooms. The source of this ability is Rainicorn DNA, specifically the influence of Lady Rainicorn's mother, who bit Jake's father in circumstances that the show eventually reveals. Rainicorns are beings of light and dimensional shifting, capable of passing through solid matter and existing at the intersection of physical and dimensional space. Jake's stretchy powers are a version of this, a Rainicorn-derived magical ability that manifests in him as physical elasticity because his particular physiology took the Rainicorn magic in its own direction. He uses these powers with a combination of creativity and pragmatism that is one of the show's consistent pleasures. Jake does not treat his magic as cosmic. He treats it as a tool. He is a dog with extremely useful abilities who loves burritos and his family and his best friend. The stretchy powers are just a very practical thing that he has, like opposable thumbs but more dramatic. Finn's relationship with magic is one of the show's subtler, long-running threads. He is human. He does not have innate magical ability the way Jake does, or elemental power the way Bubblegum does. He has trained himself to be effective in a magical world through physical capability, willingness to engage with magical situations on their own terms, and the occasional willingness to use magical items when they are available and appropriate. His grass sword, a magical weapon that bonds to his arm and eventually takes on a life of its own, is the most significant magical entanglement of his personal history. A piece of magic that chooses him in a way that he has to learn to live with, rather than something he sought out. The grass sword's ultimate fate separating from Finn and becoming its own entity. The grass Finn, who wanders Ooh as Finn's echo, is one of the show's most beautiful magical resolutions. Magic that attaches itself to a person is not simply a possession. It has its own nature, its own growth, its own eventual trajectory. The grass Finn is not Finn. He is something that grew from Finn, the same way that any relationship or commitment grows into something that eventually has its own independent existence, beyond what either participant originally brought to it. The Enchiridion, the book of heroes that Finn retrieves in the show's very first episode, is a magical text of enormous significance, ultimately revealed to be a key to the multiverse when its gem is used correctly. That this cosmically significant object sits on a shelf in a treehouse for much of the show's run is very Ooh. The most powerful magical artifacts in the land of Ooh are sometimes found in the most ordinary places, waiting patiently for someone to understand what they actually are. Part 12. The Legacy of Magic in Ooh. What the Impossible Leaves Behind. At the end of Adventure Time's main series, and in the years following, the land of Ooh is by its own standards at peace. Not simple peace, not the peace of a world where nothing difficult can happen, but the peace that comes after the largest, most threatening things have been resolved and the world has survived them. Gulb has been contained. The Lich is a baby named Sweet Pea, living with 2 loving parents in a comfortable home. Simon Petrikov is himself again, struggling with the particular difficulty of being yourself after 1,000 years of not being it. The elementals are in balance. The kingdoms maintain their complicated relationships without any single force, trying to make everything into one thing. The magic of Ooh did not simplify. The land did not become less strange or less impossible or less saturated with the impossible after the major catastrophes of the series were resolved. If anything, the survivors of those catastrophes carry within them even more evidence of what magic can do, what it costs, what it builds, what it destroys. Marceline is still a vampire with the accumulated powers of an extinct species inside her. Princess Bubblegum is still 827 years old and still skeptical of magic while being made of it. The ice crown exists somewhere, its magical encoding unchanged, still ready to read the deepest wish of anyone who puts it on and fulfill it in the way that only it knows how. What has the history of magic done to the land of Oo? What legacy does all of it leave behind? The most honest answer is that magic made Oo what it is, not just the colorful surface of it, the candy kingdoms and vampire queens and stretchy dogs, but the specific quality of its existence. The quality of being a place where impossible things are not merely possible but ubiquitous, where the line between science and sorcery is as thin as bubblegum's persistent claim that the two are entirely different, where a 1,000-year-old crown can still be out there, somewhere, waiting, and this is understood as a fact of the landscape rather than an emergency. The magic of Oo is a magic that has been shaped by loss, by the Mushroom War, which ended one world and let the magic of the next one flood in through the crack, by Simon Petrikov, who lost himself to the magic that kept him alive, by Marceline, who became what she hunted in order to protect what she loved, by Princess Bubblegum, who has lived long enough to be changed by time in ways that magic cannot simply undo, by Betty, who loved so completely that she merged with chaos itself to keep what she loved from being unmade. This is not a coincidence. The magic of Oo is not separate from the suffering that produced it and sustained it and was produced by it in return. The Ice Crown's magic is beautiful and terrible, for the same reason that grief is beautiful and terrible, because it preserves, with desperate fidelity, the shape of a love that cannot be reached anymore. The elemental magic of Oo is as wild as it is because it flooded back into a broken world and had to find its level without the structures that had previously organized it. The Lich's magic is extinction magic, because the mushroom bomb that gave it physical form was the most perfectly expressed extinction attempt humanity ever managed. Magic in Oo carries the memory of what made it. The catalyst comets will continue their 1,000-year cycle. The elementals will die and be reborn in new forms, each incarnation carrying the essence of their element into whatever circumstances the next era of the world produces. The wizards will have their battles and their petty hierarchies and their genuine moments of beauty when someone discovers something new about how the magical field of Oo works. Peppermint Butler will continue to practice his dark arts with the serene competence of someone who has never found a compelling reason to stop. Jake's children, his magical children, half dog and half rainicorn, each one a small miracle of two magical lineages crossing, will grow up in a world that is, if not safe, at least a world that has survived the worst of what it was capable of producing. And Finn the human, the last human boy, the current incarnation of a cosmic life force that has been cycling through the deep history of this planet since before the first cell, divided in the first warm pool of primordial chemistry. Finn will keep going. Will keep having adventures. Will keep meeting impossible things and asking them what they need and offering them what he has, which is stubborn human goodness applied without irony to situations that would overwhelm a less essentially grounded person. The magic of Oo chose its champions well, not because they are the most powerful, though some of them are extraordinary, but because they are the ones who kept asking the right question: what does this mean? What does it cost? Who does it serve? The Ice Crown's magic devastated Simon Petrikov and kept him alive long enough to eventually be himself again. The cost was centuries of identity, of memory, of the love that motivated the whole terrible transaction. The payoff was Simon, returned, in a world still complicated and strange enough to need him. The vampiric magic that Marceline carries was taken from beings she killed, at the cost of her own mortality, in service to the human survivors of a war that ended a world. She is the last vampire. She is also the last memory of all the vampires she destroyed. She carries their powers the way a library carries books, not as trophies but as preservation, as evidence that those abilities existed and that someone thought them worth the cost of keeping. The elemental magic of Princess Bubblegum is the magic of someone who builds, who has always been building, who built a kingdom out of candy and science and the slow accumulation of 800 years of hard-won understanding of what it takes to make civilization function in a world that is trying, constantly, to be chaotic. The Candy Kingdom is her answer to Golb. It is her insistence that structure is worth building and maintaining and defending, even when the universe contains forces that regard structure as a temporary inconvenience. The cosmic magic of the catalyst comets runs through Finn in ways he does not always understand. It makes him matter at a level larger than any individual adventure. It means that when he stands up to the Lich, When he insists on life in the face of extinction, he is not simply a brave boy doing brave things. He is a force of the universe doing what it does. He is the Blue Comet's old mission continuing, in its newest body, in its latest form, in a world that still needs someone to choose life with conviction when the alternative is available and tempting. And gold, the thing that should not be, that is older than order and immune to most of what ooze magic can do, is contained. Betty chose love over survival, chose to merge with chaos rather than let it unmake the world, and that choice held. The universe's chaos principle and the love of one particular woman for one particular man are now the same entity, wandering somewhere outside the land of O, and whether that entity is at peace or at war with itself is something the story does not tell us. But it is not here. The world survived. What does all of this leave behind? A land that knows what it has survived. That carries its history in its landscape, in its ruins, in the ancient trees that were once prisons and the candy kingdoms built over post-war craters, and the ice kingdoms maintained by a crown that has been working without interruption since the Cretaceous period. The magic of Oo is not abstract. It is specific and historical, and full of the personalities and choices of the beings who shaped it and were shaped by it in return. It leaves behind the question that Adventure Time always returns to, the one that sits underneath the magical adventure and the candy kingdoms and the cosmic comets. What do you do with the impossible? When the world you live in is saturated with magic, when the laws of physics are flexible, and the history of your land is full of catastrophes and recoveries, and the stubborn insistence of life on continuing what is the correct response. The show's answer, accumulated across 10 seasons and multiple specials and a spin-off, and the careers of dozens of writers and artists who cared deeply about what they were making, is something like this. You live in it. You make friends with the impossible. You ask it what it needs. You build kingdoms and have adventures and fall in love and lose things and recover from losses and discover that the magic, for all its history and all its cost, has produced a world that is worth inhabiting with your whole self. The Ice Crown was a mistake that became a tragedy, that became, eventually, a story about what it means to love someone so much that you outlast them by 1,000 years. Marceline's vampirism was an accident of a fight she won, and it became the music she makes in her house and the relationship she built with Princess Bubblegum across centuries of complicated friendship and eventual love. The Lich's extinction magic produced, in its defeat, a child named Sweet Pea who sits in a loving home and does not yet understand what he came from, which is exactly as it should be. The magic of Oo is the world it made, and the world it made is, for all its darkness and all its scars, a place where a boy with no innate magical ability can grow up to matter to the cosmos. Where a candy scientist can also be a goddess. Where a dog can stretch to fill any shape the situation needs. Where the last vampire plays bass guitar in a house full of memories, and the man she has always loved gets to be himself again. That is what magic leaves behind when it has been in a place long enough. Not just the impossible things it produced, but the ordinary things those impossible things eventually made possible. The relationships. The histories, the mornings after the catastrophes, when the survivors look around and take stock of what remains and decide, once more, to build something with it. The land of Oo carries all of its magic as the living carry their memories. Not always consciously, not always comfortably, but always, always underneath. Always available to surface when the right question is asked or the right story is told. And that is why we tell these stories. Why we pull the blanket up and turn the light low and follow the history of impossible things through the long, comfortable hours of the night. Because magic, even when it costs everything, produces worlds worth knowing. Produces people worth following through every terrible and beautiful thing that happens to them. The world ended, and then it became Oo. And Oo became something worth all of it. If you stayed through this whole journey through the comets and the crowns and the catastrophes and the candy kingdoms, and the quiet, beautiful legacy of a world that survived more than it should have, thank you. Genuinely, from a person who thinks about this show with more affection than is probably reasonable. It means a lot that you're out there, listening. Drop a comment with where you're watching from. And drop a like if this helped you understand a little more about the world you've been visiting every time you put on Adventure Time. Subscribe if you want more of this because there is always more to explore, always more story underneath the story, always more to say about the impossible world that grew up in the rubble of ours. Rest easy. You've earned it. End of script. Appendix. The quiet magic memory, music, and the things that persist. There is a kind of magic in the land of Oo that does not have a name in any wizarding tradition, does not appear in any list of elemental powers, and cannot be detected by the magical sensing equipment that Princess Bubblegum occasionally deploys in her laboratory when she is trying to measure something she insists is science. It is the magic of persistence. Of things that continue to matter after every reason they should have stopped has been exhausted. Simon Petrikov, when the Ice Crown was removing his memories in the years after the Mushroom War, wrote a note to Marceline. He wrote it in the increasingly fragmented syntax of a mind losing its grip on language, but the emotional content was complete. He loved her. He was sorry for what he was becoming. He wanted her to know that whatever the strange person she was going to end up taking care of might do or say, it was not what he wanted. It was what the crown wanted. She kept that note for 1,000 years. This is the kind of thing that magical cosmologies usually do not account for, the weight that an object or a memory or a piece of paper can carry when the feelings written into it were genuine enough. The Ice Crown is a magnificent and terrible artifact, ancient and powerful, and the pivot point of several major story arcs. The note Simon wrote to Marceline has no magical properties whatsoever. It is just paper with words on it. And yet, in terms of what it means, in terms of what it represents about the history of magic in Oo, it is at least as significant as the crown itself. Because the note is proof that Simon was there, that he existed, specifically, as himself, before the crown made him into something else. The magic of the crown works by overwriting, reaching in, and replacing what is with what the wearer most deeply wishes were true. But the note exists outside the crown's reach. It is a message sent from the self the crown was erasing to the world the crown could not touch, a bottle thrown into a sea of transformation with the specific intention of landing on a shore that still remembered who he was. Marceline's music does something similar. She does not talk easily about her history, about Simon, about her mother, about the long centuries between the Mushroom War and the present, about all the things she has lost in a lifespan that has outlasted almost everything she initially cared about. She writes songs instead. Songs that contain those histories with a density of emotional truth that conversation cannot achieve, and she performs them in the quiet of her house, alone or occasionally for someone she trusts enough to let hear. The song she eventually writes about Simon is the show at the peak of what it can do with a single piece of music. It is not a list of plot events. It is the emotional architecture of a relationship that lasted through impossible circumstances and continues to matter even now. The magical significance of that song is not mystical, but the way it carries history, the way it preserves a truth about Oo's past that no chronicle or archive could capture with the same fidelity, is its own kind of sorcery. The Dead Worlds of Adventure Time are another expression of this quiet magic of persistence. Glob World, where Jake believes he will go when he dies. The various realms that different cultures in Oo's diverse supernatural population have developed relationships with. These places are not simply narrative conveniences or metaphysical speculation. They are evidence that the universe of Adventure Time takes the continuity of self seriously, that who a person is does not simply stop when their physical form stops being available. The magic of Oo extends into death, into the management of souls across whatever comes after, in ways that give the beings who inhabit it a relationship to their own mortality that is different from what pre-war humanity had. Death himself is a character. He is depicted as a figure from the American Old West, suited and skeletal, managing his domain with the competence of a long-tenured professional who has seen everything and is surprised by almost nothing. He knows Peppermint Butler. They have a relationship. This is not incidental. The fact that a candy butler and the ruler of the underworld are on familiar terms is a perfect summary of how magic and the ordinary are woven together in Oo, how the cosmic and the domestic share the same neighborhood. The ability to speak to the dead, to visit the afterlife, to barter with death himself for the return of someone who has passed these capabilities, exist in Oo's magical landscape and are accessed by various characters at various moments of the series. None of these interactions are presented as easy. Death is not a villain, but he is also not accommodating. The rules of his domain are real rules, and navigating them requires either great skill, significant bargaining power, or the kind of desperate creative thinking that Finn and Jake specialize in. There is also the matter of the Nightosphere Hunson Abadir's dimension, the place that functions as Adventure Time's version of a demonic underworld. It is a place of genuine horror, populated by souls that have been consumed by its lord, stretched across a hellscape that is both ridiculous and genuinely unsettling in the way that the show's best darker moments always manage. The magic that runs the Nightosphere is demonic magic, a distinct flavor of the supernatural that operates on principles older than the post-Mushroom War world and somewhat independent of the elemental framework that structures most of Oo's magic. Hudson Abadir's Nightosphere Amulet is one of the most dangerous magical artifacts in the show, a piece of demonic technology that transforms its wearer into a being capable of devouring souls, an amplifier for the specific kind of dark magic that defines the Nightosphere's power. Marceline wears it at least once, briefly, as a demonstration of the kind of power her father represents. She does not keep it on. She understands, because she knows herself, that the amulet's magic would push her toward a version of herself she does not want to be, the Nightosphere's lord-in-waiting, the devourer of souls her father always wanted her to become. She chooses instead to be the vampire queen, to be a musician, to be someone who eats the color red from strawberries and sleeps in her house full of memories, and occasionally, when the world needs it, fights with everything she has. The magic of Ooh respects those choices. The magic is not deterministic. It does not decide for you what you will do with what you have been given. Simon chose to survive even knowing what the crown would cost him, and that choice was honorable even though the cost was devastating. Marceline chose not to become her father's heir even though the power was available to her, and that refusal was its own kind of courage. Princess Bubblegum chose to build a kingdom rather than simply existing as a cosmic entity, and the choice to build something, to make something, to sustain something that is as much an exercise of her elemental nature as any direct magical act. Every character in Adventure Time makes choices within and around the magical forces that shape them. The magic is real, the constraints are real, and the choices are real too, which is the thing about Ooh that makes it worth spending so much time in. Coda. The world Ooh made. The history of magic in the land of Ooh is not a history of power, it is a history of relationships. Between the ice and the fire that have balanced each other since the Cretaceous. Between the candy and the slime that filled different registers of the same elemental scale. Between Simon Petrikov and the crown that kept him alive and took his life from him. Between Marceline and the vampire she hunted, and the power she carries, and the note she has kept for 1,000 years. Between Princess Bubblegum and the candy kingdom she built, and the people she made, and the scientist's certainty she uses to keep herself from having to name what she is. Between Finn and the cosmic force he carries without knowing it, the Blue Comet's patience, living in a human boy who just wants to go on adventures and help people. Between all of these things and the world they share, the land of Ooh, which did not ask to be what it is, and is it anyway, completely, with the full character of everything that made it. The Mushroom War was the catastrophe that let the magic back in. But the magic was always going to come back. It was always there, compressed, waiting, certain that the world would eventually have room for it again. The world of Ooh is proof that catastrophe is not the end of the story. It is a transition, a terrible, costly, sometimes beautiful transition to the next thing, which is itself only the middle of a longer story that the universe is still telling. The catalyst comets will keep coming. The elementals will keep cycling through birth and death and rebirth. The wizards will keep having their battles. The ancient artifacts will keep waiting in their various locations for the right person or the wrong person to find them. Golb, contained but not destroyed, exists somewhere outside the land with Betty's love tangled up in its chaos in ways that no cosmological model has adequate language for. And in a treehouse, somewhere in the rolling hills of the land of Ooh, there is a boy who does not have magic but lives fully inside a magical world, and a dog who stretches to fill whatever shape the moment requires, and their lives are ordinary adventures in a world where the ordinary is extraordinary, where the adventures are genuinely consequential, where everything is connected to everything else by the long braided history of all the magic that came before. That is what the entire history of magic in Ooh leaves behind. Not the power, not the crowns and the comets and the cosmic forces, but this. A world where impossible things are not just possible but habitual, where love is a force as real as fire or ice, where the small, stubbornly personal things, notes written in failing syntax, songs played in a house full of memories, a dog wishing for a sandwich matter as much as the catastrophic and the cosmic. That is the land that magic made, and that is the land worth knowing everything about. Thank you for spending this time in Ooh. If you made it all the way here, drop a like, it genuinely helps more than you might think. Subscribe because there are so many more corners of this world worth exploring together. Now, rest. You've got good dreams ahead of you. One final thing. The Enchiridion and the magic of stories. There is one more piece of this history worth sitting with before we close. The Enchiridion is the first magical object that Adventure Time puts in front of us. The first episode of the entire series is called The Enchiridion, and it involves Finn going on a quest to prove himself worthy of receiving this book, a text described as a guide for heroes, a manual for the good and righteous, a source of knowledge for anyone who genuinely intends to use their abilities for the benefit of others. It is a test. Finn passes it by demonstrating that he is genuinely a hero, not in the performative sense, not in the sense of hitting the correct checkboxes, but in the sense of making real moral choices under pressure in ways that reflect actual values. He is given the book. The Enchiridion then spends several seasons being largely a background detail, a book on a shelf, a thing that exists and is acknowledged to be significant but is not, for a long time, the focus of any particular urgency. And then the Lich uses it to tear a hole in reality. The book's true nature as a device capable of opening a portal to the multiverse, as a key of unimaginable power that the Lich has been working toward retrieving since before the main series began, is revealed to be exactly as significant as its presence in the first episode implied. It was always this important. The show simply had the patience to wait until the moment was right to show you why. This is a metaphor for the magic of Wu itself. The elements were always present, even when the world could not feel them. The ice crown was always encoding its directive into whoever wore it, working slowly enough to be invisible until it was not. Marceline was always carrying the history of a species inside her, going about her ordinary existence with all of that weight held together by habit and time, and the particular stubbornness of a being who has survived too much to be diminished by any one more thing. The magic of Wu is patient. It does not always make itself visible immediately. It works in the background of lives and relationships and histories, accumulating, building toward moments of revelation that seem sudden only if you were not paying attention to the long, slow preparation that preceded them. The Enchiridion on the shelf is the magic of Wu on the shelf, waiting to be understood, waiting for the right moment, the right person, the right question to reveal what it actually is and what it has always been capable of. Adventure Time is, in the end, a show about paying attention, about noticing the things that are there, in the background, building toward something. The magic of Wu rewards attention. It rewards care. It rewards the willingness to trace a thread all the way back to where it started and follow it forward through everything it connects along the way, which is exactly what we have been doing here in the quiet hours of whatever time it is where you are. The thread started with a comet, and it runs through an ice crown and a vampire queen and a candy scientist and a stretchy dog and a human boy with a destiny he keeps refusing in favor of something more ordinary and more valuable. It runs through the catastrophe that ended one world and the slow, patient rebuild that made another. It runs through grief and love and music and the particular magic of things that endure past every reason they should have stopped. Follow the thread long enough and you end up here, in the land of Wu, in the history of a magic that came back because the world needed it to, in the story of beings who used that magic to build something worth coming back to. That is the entire history of magic in Wu, and it is a good history, worth knowing, worth carrying with you into sleep where the dreams are.